All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class, I'm preparing a series of videos that are based off of the Mozilla Developer Network Learn Web Development series. So far, I've gone through the Getting Started with the Web and the HTML Structuring the Web, which brings me to CSS Styling the Web. And I'm in the first steps. So right now I'm going to go over the overview. Now again, as it says here, this module provides a gentle beginning towards your path. All right, so we're not going to learn everything in here. In fact, you won't know everything there is to know about CSS rather after we go over all of this. So it says, what we should have a basic fundamental understanding of. In fact, I think we've already talked about this. So I'm just going to instead jump right in to what is CSS. All right, again, CSS is an acronym that stands for Cascading Style Sheets. This article, as it says, will explain what CSS is. It'll show a simple example and cover some key terms and components about the language. Okay. Now, again, remember that HTML is designed for us to create content that will go on our web page. You can, C-A-N, create an entire website that has just HTML and has no CSS and has no JavaScript. Now, if it has no CSS, it will not look very nice. And if it has no JavaScript, it won't be interactive, but it's still a website. All right, so they do mention in here that what's going to happen is if you add no CSS, by default, browsers actually, for lack of better words, kind of add their own CSS, but it's really their own default styles. And this is typically what you will change using CSS to make things look the way you want them to look. All right. So as it says, the browser will style HTML documents using their own external style sheet. All right. There'll be a certain amount of spacing, padding, margin, etc. All right. And as mentioned, you can change all of this stuff with CSS. Now, it looks like there's going to be a whole series in here of videos, okay? My hope is that I at least will be going over most of the material that will be shown in these videos, all right? So we already talked about what CSS is used for. It specifies or shows, allows you to change the presentation of web pages to users. Now it says there a document is usually a text file structured using a markup language. So in other words, you are going to use CSS to take your .html file and make it look the way you want it to look. All right. Presenting a document, it says there, means converting it into a form usable by your audience. We already talked about the fact that it is possible, plausible, whatever you want to say, to create a website which has only HTML in it, no CSS, and no JavaScript. It's going to be a hard sell getting people to go to a website like that, and even if they do, probably be even harder to get them to want to come back because there'll be no, it's not that there isn't any substance, but there won't be any style or interactivity to the web page. A browser, as mentioned there, is also known as, or AKA, a user agent. As it says there, it's a computer program that represents a person inside of a computer system. All right. CSS can be used for very basic text styling. It can be used to create layouts. It has literally scores of different things that you could do with it. Now, as mentioned down below here, when you see this, CSS is a rule-based language. So if we look at the example that's on the screen right here, this code, says that by default, what we want is we want every H1 tag to be red in color, and every H1 tag to have a font size of 5M. Now later we'll talk about M's and rems and pixels and points, etc. All right, but let's grab this just so you can see it in action. Now I will have to make one change to this, and you may have already figured out what it is. So we've already got this with the text shadow on there. I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll come back in here and I'm going to add this. I'm going to have to change it around. I don't want that H1 there anymore. And I don't want that curly brace. Now, right now, this isn't going to work very well because I've got a red background. Okay, I've got a red background and I'm trying to put red text on it. So let's make another change. Let's say body here, and we'll change the background color. It was red. We'll just make it white for right now. You will immediately be able to see the difference once we do this. So save. And I believe our text color in here is also white, so it's not going to show now. So we'll say color. How about yellow? All right, so this is going to look markedly different from the way it looked just a couple minutes ago. What do I mean? Again, easiest to show you. Here's our site. Let's refresh. All right. So now notice our background is white. Our H1 is red and a lot bigger than it used to be. And our text color throughout here is yellow. Well, that's not showing very well. So again, by just making another simple change here, let's change this. So instead of it being yellow, let's make it navy. All right. And again, come back in and refresh, and you can see the immediate difference here. All right. Okay. So as mentioned, CSS is a rule-based language. You define the rules. You specify the groups of styles that should be applied to particular elements. In this case, the element is the H1. This will apply this to every element that we have in here. Every H1 element, I should say, that we have in here. So if we had multiple H1 elements, it would be applied to all of them. All right, now, all of them on this page because I put it in a style tag on this page. So this is the selector, H1, right here. Then inside of curly braces, we put property. So this is the color property of the H1. This is the font size of the H1. All right. And this is the value of that property. So the value of the color property is red. The value of the font size is 5M. Again, everything is inside of curly braces. Now, just so you're aware of this, if you've got multiple things in here like we do, you have to have a semicolon at the end of each one. The only exception to that is the last one. It's typically put here anyway, but if you leave it off, it should still work just fine. So here's a style sheet with more rules. You already saw the first one, but this also says that we want the font color of every paragraph to be black. So in other words, if we added this to the current things that we have out here, you will again, one of the nice things about CSS is what I like to refer to as immediate feedback, because we make changes and you immediately see them reflected on in the system here. So let me come in here. I guess that should be moved over there. So we've got our body, we've got our H1. Before our images here, let's add the paragraph one. All right. So up above at the top of the program, we said we wanted all of our text to be navy, but we're overwriting it here, but we're saying, hey, if it's a paragraph, we don't want it to be navy, we want it to be black. All right. And a little hard to see because we're working with navy and black, but it still is fine. All right, in fact, let's change this from navy to let's just make it blue. All right, so it'll be a lot lighter. Now, if we come back in here, you don't see any difference until we refresh. Now that's blue. You can notice how much lighter it is, and our paragraph text is now black. All right. Now we could, you don't have to do this, but one thing that we could do to make this stand out a little bit better, bigger, whatever, not bigger, but better than it is right now is instead of our background color being white, let's try something like, I think the goldenrod would work. Not sure if that is going to be better or worse, but all right. So you're starting to really see, hopefully, how this thing is starting to come together and why you would actually go in and use CSS. Now it says you can find the links to all the CSS property pages and other features in the CSS reference. And if I do bring that up, this is it. This is going to be really big. This is all CSS in here. So what I'm giving you, these are all the different CSS properties. And there looks at least as though there's at least 100 of them. And there's probably, if you told me there were a couple hundred or a few hundred, I'd believe that. And there's a lot more in here than what I'm going to be able to give you. But again, this is kind of the quintessential thing that you can look at in here. All right. And let's see, this is CSS/reference. Is there one for HTML as well? Yes, there is. So this is all HTML. Now, much of this is stuff we've already gone over. But again, as I already mentioned to you, as far as a quintessential type of reference here, we could also say, how about looking here? Is there one in here for JavaScript? And yes, there is. All right. So as I already mentioned to you, this is going to give you even more depth and breadth of coverage than what I'm able to show you. All right. So all right. Says as there are so many things that you can style with CSS, the language is broken down into modules. You'll see references to these modules in the Microsoft, or the, I don't know, I keep saying Microsoft, in the Mozilla Developer Network. All right, and they give you some examples in here. Now, as mentioned right here, all web standards are defined in giant documents called specs. These specs are published by different organizations. All right, let's look quickly at these ones that are in here. The first is the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. They make recommendations for standards that they publish, and typically that will be adopted by all browsers. They are recommendations. They are a governing body. They cannot force you to do anything. The WHAT-WG, and I'm trying to tell you or show you quickly what that stands for, which is the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. They work typically, I believe at least, in conjunction with the W3C. All right. Then there's ECMA. ECMA is the European Computer Manufacturing Association. And ECMA is kind of the governing body for JavaScript. Finally, it looks like this is Chronos, and I'm not even sure what that is. It says it's an open nonprofit member-driven consortium of a bunch of different companies to create advanced royalty-free interoperability for graphics, virtual reality, etc. So a lot of the newer types of things that you'll see in here. All right. So it says there CSS was developed within the W3C by the CSS Working Group. New features are developed or, as mentioned, specified by this working group. And again, these are just recommendations. And typically these recommendations will be put up there, they will be published, and later they will be adopted by the browser manufacturers. So as it says there, once CSS has been specified, then it is only useful for developing web pages if one or more browsers have implemented it. All right, it says that the code has been written to turn the instruction into the CSS file into something useful on the screen. And as it says, we'll go over it a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage later. All right, so browser compatibility, you can look at this yourselves. What I have mentioned to you already is if you want to know if a CSS feature works with your browser or not, you should be going out to caniuse.com. Then you put in the feature. So if I wanted to know, for example, if the strong tag, you can see that in there that basically it's used, all right, that it's supported by virtually all browsers. Okay. All right. That's pretty much it for this first one. All right, so we have jumped through the what is CSS for. So that's what we touched on. So next will be the getting started with CSS. So they're going to have a big document, and a lot of it will be very similar to stuff we've already covered. And I will see you with that particular example in just a couple minutes.